For the second time in her history, Bethel found herself facing a major pandemic that affected not only her membership, but also every person on the planet. However, unlike during the 1918 influenza pandemic, Bethel faced this 2020 coronavirus pandemic without one of her most essential and enduring parts of her faith legacy: the physical ability of her people to gather, fellowship, pray, and worship together in one place. Once more and again, as in 1918, people all over the world were advised and in some cases mandated to shelter in place and to keep their social distance from their fellow man to stop the spread of the virus. Here at Bethel, we wrestled with this real threat of closing our doors, but nothing in our history and in our legacy of faith indicated that closing was an option.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ricky Houston, pastor of the Bethel Metropolitan Baptist Church here in beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. I've been privileged to be the pastor of God's church to the city, God's house to the city, for the last 17 years and a few months. A few months ago, a year plus now, we were all confronted with this deadly virus known as COVID-19. And such a virus is really not new in the history of Bethel. Bethel's saints dealt with such a pandemic back in 1918. And there were some saints then that sort of paved the way. Their names are still remembered in what we do today as a church. Being a beacon of light and being a group that looks after and cares for one another. Well, 2020 hit and we're back at the notion of pandemic. So how did we go about handling this? First of all, prayerfully, certainly prayerfully. Some would say we closed the doors, but I would say we didn't, because ministry still happened here. We were still taking care of one another. In fact, my motto, so to speak, was make sure you're caring for one another, praying with one another, and sharing with one another in a manner that the early church did in the book of Acts, how they met from house to house. And we did some of that via Zoom and conference calls and phone calls and kind of staying within our bubble. So that we would have that fellowship, we would continue to study. So I encourage the people to, carry out, to serve in a manner that the early church did, because I really believe that's what God was directing us back to, the direction of the early church in the book of Acts, where they met from house to house. And the gospel was still spread. The message of Jesus Christ still went forth. So how did we handle it? How are we handling it? By caring for one another, sharing with one another, praying with one another in a manner that the early church has or did. I think Bethel Metropolitan has, in fact, I know Bethel Metropolitan has been extremely favored and blessed in the midst of this pandemic. Yes, we've lost some saints to heaven, we've lost some individuals to eternity, but overall, God has been good, is good, and God remains good to us. So we will continue to weather this pandemic with God's help, with God's grace, the wisdom of God, caring for one another, sharing with one another, and praying with one another in a manner that the early church did. And yes, there are some specific protocols from a health standpoint that we undertake as well. We do follow the science, so to speak, with this. We have been a spot here at the church to allow for vaccinations on more than one occasion. We've supported those around the city, and just practices that will, keep yourself safe and your loved ones safe. So we're doing a number of things to weather this pandemic, just like those saints did in 1918. We're just as strong. We serve the same God who brought them through, and He's going to bring us through as well. So God bless you. May He keep you. Continue to pray with one another, care with one another, and share with one another in a manner that the early church did. God bless you.
So I am Grant McCrae, the fourth youth minister of Bethel Metropolitan Missionary Baptist Church. And the question was asked to me, how has the pandemic impacted my life? So before the pandemic, I honest to God don't even remember before the pandemic, to be honest. But 2020 has come and it has went. I remember a couple months ago actually pausing and asking myself this question, because in more than one way, I was affected by the pandemic. My mental was affected by the pandemic. The things that I used to be, afraid of or weren't afraid of, maybe all that's all over the place now. I really had to self-evaluate. It was a lot harder to maintain health than I thought it would be. I never, ever really thought that, I'm not sickly or the people around me aren't sickly, because we try not to be. And then came a pandemic where you had no control over what happened, whether anybody around you was sick, whether you got sick. We really had no control for the longest parts of it. And that was straining to me. To a point where after, toward the end of 2020, we're all doing all these things to maintain health, to maintain safety, to keep distance, and to keep a mask on, because we didn't know much about Corona at the time. We didn't have a vaccine in sight, so you just kind of had to block people, your best. That took a lot out of me to realize what it took to not get sick in 2020. And then you hearing other variants a year later, and I really had to ask myself, was I up to do it again? Because I was more tired than I thought. I'm tired of the words vaccine. I'm tired of the word Corona. I'm tired of the word social distancing. But this is our norm now. This is our reality. So you really can't get tired, or you'll be on the wrong side of it. But I did not. Going into the Delta variant and the variant now, and I didn't have that strength that I had in 2020 to not want to get sick, to not want to, be out in front of people. I lost all of that, and I really kind of, started to take it for granted, if I'm being honest. I started to take my health for granted, and the fact that I actually was doing things, me and my wife were doing things to prevent ourselves from being sick. You just never know. Now you really have to worry about what are you bringing from the outside in. The other part of it that I battled with personally was the fact that my wife's a nurse, and she's a COVID nurse. She's an ICU nurse, so she was going directly into it. Well, we have a small child, and that took a toll, because we had proclivities and we had standards that we had to start living by, as far as like she couldn't really just jump into a hug and a kiss with us when she first got home, and we had to really separate ourselves. We had to create guidelines in our own home for our own safety, so that we can go to work every day and we can come home every day. And that was different. That's different. Even now, she's travel nursing now, and it's almost a 24, 48-hour period before she's really comfortable being around my son and myself. And this is her own home. And so that's definitely an adjustment that we're making. But we're getting through it. We're getting through it.
Hello, everyone. This is Malcolm Flakes, duly sworn officer of Bethel Metropolitan Baptist Church. I'd like to talk a little bit about the transition we made from going from our traditional services of in-house services to more of a pandemic-influenced online service. When the pandemic first hit, we had several meetings with the pastor. And in April, as a matter of fact, April 2020, we actually shut down, and we shut down for a complete year up through August 2021. When we first shut down, we realized that we had really a technology gap that prevented us from actually being able to offer services online. So we immediately did some upgrades to our online services, actually brought in new cameras. We actually brought in an actual IT person to help us. We actually brought in live streaming. We built new computers. So we did a huge technology upgrade that allowed us to now give online. We actually are broadcasting online. We're actually going through YouTube. And we're actually able to do a little bit more media outreach than we ever had done before. The thing that I'm most proud of is that we never missed a Sunday of service. We actually had services every Sunday. We're now in a hybrid mode of doing services, but looking back, it got us to the point, at least personally, of saying thank you. Thank you to Christ, because we needed a change. We actually implemented a change, and He guided us through that change. And as we move forward through 2021, we're learning more and more about how hybrid churches really work. We're back in the facility doing some services, but we understand where people are still a little bit nervous about coming to the facility, so we're actually able to offer them continued online services, and we feel really good about it. The final thing I want to make note of is our children. Our children are the future, and when we were getting to the point of actually offering online services, they get it. They got it real fast. So we're able now to actually incorporate more of our kids into technology that they understand today. They were able to help us with YouTube. They were able to help us with Zoom. They were able to help their parents, grandparents, standing up IP addresses, getting the live broadcast at home. And the one thing that I really feel good about is we're now able to get families back together, sitting at home, participating in church service. And that's a real accomplishment, because families is what we're all about here at Bethel. But more importantly, we're about Bible teaching, and we are a Christ-based Christian church that really focuses on teaching the Word of God. We've done that through the pandemic, and we will continue to do it in the future. Thank you.
My name is Mother Dora York. I'm speaking on behalf of the Mothers Ministry. We had, as mothers, to learn about how to use technology. It was such as the phones, the TVs, and Google and whatever. It was something that we didn't use on a daily basis. So what I did, I made a list of all the mothers, their addresses, their phone numbers, birth dates, and all, and passed it out to all the members. Then I made another list of all of them and gave them, matched them all up with a prayer partner. And that's how we converse, so that we could reach everybody every day. And that was great, because it took the pressure off from them trying to keep up with all the technologies and whatnot. So all they had to do was just to use the phone. Through it all,
God made a way for us because he said we knew from where we came, and we know that God is able and he would keep us. My answer to our problems was to take it to God in prayer, and we took it there and left it there, and we came out okay.
My name is Deacon Marvin York. I'm the chairman of the Deacons Ministry here at Bethel Metropolitan Baptist Church. Just going through the pandemic was challenging, just a reality check for what was going on around us. Because of my outside influence with my day-to-day job, the hot spots, Florida, Michigan, and also Arizona, were present on my mind. Sharing the information with my church about what was happening across the United States with this pandemic was, very insightful for us to make an action, and that it was real, that people were dying. Just that simple. What we had to do is, in order to keep God's word and being engaged, Pastor wanted us to make sure that we were engaged. How could we continue on with the word being delivered in the engagement? Well, we had to improvise and make changes. From things that we have done over and over, that was just a habit, had to change. Streaming was one of the things that we said we could get done. Streaming the ministry for the church members to be able to be online and making sure we had the information for them to get to it and get the word out there. Working with the deacons and the trustees about making change. Technology changes and just actually logistic changes for us to make things happen. Bus ministry had to be halted. The worship service was changed to being online and streaming. As far as cleaning the church, had to make sure it was sanitized at this point in time after any type of engagement. Funeral services had to be modified based on the CDC. And it was hard for people just to deal on their day-to-day. Schools being shut down and students being homeschooled, parents working from home and now teaching children online. Stressful times for those type of events. Understanding that our membership was stressed and how could we actually help them, console them, step in for them, give them encouragement, pray over the phone with them that it was going to be all right, where our help comes from, and focused on the Lord, not on the problem. Because he's always been there and he's going to continue to be there. So we did those things, from the elderly that were over 65 trying to be able to stream, use their phone device to stream it onto their TV, was something challenging for our senior members. Just those things alone, Sunday school being transformed to being on calls, Facebook for Bible study. It was a transition. And it didn't happen all at once, but the membership here at Bethel worked together to get that done. What did we see that was really important for Bethel? The vaccination. We became a vaccination site. We became part of the community to help get people vaccinated and save lives. It was that important to us to make sure our congregation, our community, got service. And so, united for a cause, to engage with God's word, some churches didn't make it. Their doors got closed. Some deafs in their congregation at leadership closed those doors. But we were on our knees. We were praying. We had the senior leadership praying. And those prayers were answered because we are still here, financially strong, membership strong, relationship strong. That's how it affected us. We became stronger.
Bethel Baptist Church was one of 7 churches that provided faith identity to the Black community in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1918. Bethel stood strong and mighty on the southwest corner of 10th Street South and 3rd Avenue. Bethel owned her corner. As the church of the open doors, she spoke to the history of the Black community in a way that no other institution ever could. She was a very sacred place, a place where our very own cloud of witnesses lived and interacted with one another. This is our faith heritage. This is how we got here. This is who we are. When that first congregation of 8 opened the doors of Bethel Baptist Church on September 27, 1903, they were determined that those doors would never close. If it had not been for the Lord on my side, where would I be? Oh, where would I be if it had not been? Oh, for the Lord on my side. Oh, where would I be? Oh, if it had not been, not where would I be? He kept my enemies away. He let the sun shine through a cloudy day. He rocked me in the cradle of his arms when he knew I'd been battered and scorned. So if it had not been for the Lord on my side, oh, where would I be? Oh, where would I be?
I am Sharian Thurman Reeves, History and Heritage Ministry Leader here at Bethel Metropolitan Baptist Church in St. Petersburg, Florida. We are preparing to celebrate our 118th year as a church. Usually when we celebrate, we do an abbreviated kind of history, a brief summary. But 118 years deserve more than just a brief summary. So this year, the ministry decided to tune in or zoom in on 2 specific years in our history, 1918 and 2020. We chose 1918 because there was, in fact, a flu pandemic at that time. And the 2020 coronavirus pandemic really mimicked and mirrored that pandemic. So we thought we would look at what Bethel did in 1918 during the pandemic in St. Petersburg, Florida. Now, 1918 was, in fact, a pivotal year for Bethel. There were a trifecta of things that occurred. There was a trifecta. There was the flu pandemic, there was the Great Migration, and of course, there was World War I. Research during that time was a little hard because most documented artifacts or anything dealing with history did not include African Americans. So we had to rely on collective memory, and we had to rely on a few documented types of things. We did learn that in 1918, there were at least 30 members of the St. Petersburg Black community, also known as Peppertown, that were members of Bethel. They included men and women. They were the deacons, the trustees, because by then we did have those ministries established. But the big thing in 1918 that occurred was the pandemic. It, in 1918, actually killed 675,000 people in the United States. More than 50 million people died worldwide. In Florida, 4,000 people died. But here in St. Petersburg, only 8 people died. But during the pandemic, there was no cure. There really was no medicine. People had to rely on home remedies and basically good old common sense nursing. We did learn that the members of Bethel did aid in taking care of the Black community in St. Petersburg. They went from house to house. They got the people, they really stressed wearing masks. They stressed staying home if you were sick. And they stressed good hygiene. At that time, there was one hospital that serviced African Americans, the Good Samaritan Hospital. And the community itself had to take care of everything concerning health care there. So Bethel members played a big role in taking care of the hospital duties, all the different things that needed to be done to provide care. The community did have at least 3 nurses. There was a pharmacy, and the hospital did have a Black superintendent. But the community itself took care of itself. Many things, other things were going on at that time, like, of course, there was the Jim Crow. Still was Jim Crow era. And Blacks could not get a lot of the care or a lot of the amenities that the white community could get. And so they had to figure out how to make do with whatever they had. And of course, we all know that that's what we do as Black people. Bethel did get through the pandemic, of course, and because the flu pandemic hit St. Petersburg really, really lightly, as I said earlier, only 8 people died. But because of that, no public closings were ordered by the mayor. So Bethel's doors did stay open. Now we segue to 2020, and we have another virus. Like the 1918 pandemic, flu pandemic, there was no cure for the coronavirus. There was no vaccine. Again, you had to rely on common sense, taking care of yourself. We did now have the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, that we didn't have in 1918. And that organization gave us guidelines, one of which, same as in 1918, wear your mask. We actually were mandated to wear masks. And buildings, businesses did close. Bethel didn't close its doors. However, we were forced to look at a new way of holding church services. And we went completely digital. We explored ways to use social media, and we got through that. There were racial disparities in the caregiving given in the coronavirus as we went through 2020. Some people were getting some of the experimental drugs, and some people were getting care over others. And of course, we recognized, we saw the disparities in our community. As the year went on and we got into 2021, we did get a vaccine. And Bethel did become a vaccine site because, again, the disparities in distributing the vaccine were also noted. And Bethel became a site to distribute the vaccine. Now we're open, and our members are slowly coming back because in 2021, the coronavirus decided not to remain just that virus. It decided to mutate, and we do have a few mutants, a couple. And so people are still being very cautious, even with the vaccine. But we are glad to be open and coming back. In 2020, we did have about 20 saints who went on home to glory. We want to acknowledge them. When we remember them, we are grateful and blessed to have had traces of their lives to hold on to keep close to our spirits so that we will not forget to walk in the ancient paths and the godly way. From them, we learned how to develop a profound reverence for God, how to trust in God through pain, and how to know and practice the importance of community. They teach those who have gone on home to glory. They have taught us who we are and how to carry on when Black lives did not matter in 1918 and still do not matter in 2020. For those saints, we are thankful for their stories and their triumphs. We respect them and love them and honor them, and we remember them because in them we are taught lessons of faith, truth, and wisdom.